The expensive crystal spoon clattered onto the tablecloth, a sound that would split my life into before and after. I remember the exact moment everything changed. The soft gold light of the ballroom chandelier caught the falling spoon mid-air. For a fraction of a second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then the noise registered, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the string quartet's gentle melody like a blade through silk. My stepbrother, Wesley, erupted from his chair with the violent grace of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. The silk napkin that had been carefully arranged across his lap fell forgotten to the floor. His face, all sharp angles and inherited entitlement, flushed a deep crimson. But it was his eyes that terrified me. They weren't filled with rage. They were alight with something far more dangerous, the vicious joy of a predator who'd finally caught his prey. "You are a total failure, Anya," he said, his voice cutting through the music like a whip. The orchestra's strings faltered, then stopped. Every head in the ballroom turned toward us. A complete and utter disgrace to the Vance name. I remember thinking, absurdly, that this couldn't be real. That I would wake up in my childhood bed, safe in the mansion on Willowbrook Lane, and this would all dissolve like morning mist. It didn't. $3 million of the Legacy Homes project has been pulled because of your incompetence, Wesley continued, his voice rising with theatrical precision. He was performing now, and he knew he had an audience. You don't have the brains to run Dad's company. You never did. You're finished, Anya. Do you hear me? Finished. Before I could speak, before I could even process what he was saying, he reached across the table and snatched my diploma from its place of honor. The expensive leather portfolio that held my greatest achievement, my graduation with highest honors in architectural history, crumpled between his angry fingers. For a moment, I thought he might tear it. Instead, he hurled it down in front of me like it was garbage. The entire room fell silent. 300 people, colleagues of my father, my classmates, strangers I'd smiled at all evening, watched me crumble. I felt the heat rising in my neck first, a terrible, dizzying rush of shame that burned like fire through my veins. My hands trembled as they lay flat against the tablecloth. The white damask felt impossibly soft, impossibly cruel. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. I wanted to disappear. But then I felt something else, building beneath the shame. Anger. Cold, crystal clear anger. My stepmother, Vivian, remained perfectly composed in her designer gown, a dress that probably cost more than my entire education. She sat with her spine rigid, her blonde hair arranged in an artful chignon, her expression a study in controlled refinement. She didn't stand up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Slowly, deliberately, she looked at me the way one might regard an insect on the sidewalk. The way that had made me feel small my entire life. "Wesley is absolutely right, dear," she said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "You've proven yourself completely inadequate to the task. It's past time you accepted your limitations and recognized your place in this family." She raised her hand, those perfectly manicured fingers, nails painted a shade called autumn plum, and gestured toward the heavy glass doors at the far end of the ballroom like I was a servant being dismissed. "Leave now, Anya. Do not make a scene. You are embarrassing us. You are embarrassing the Vance name." The finality in her voice was worse than any shouting match could have been. This wasn't anger. This was erasure. This was being cast out. I stood slowly, gathering my ripped diploma, my small designer purse, a gift from my father that suddenly felt like a relic from another lifetime. I didn't try to defend myself. I knew it would be pointless. Their minds had already been made up. Whatever truth existed in that room had been rewritten the moment Wesley decided to break me publicly. I met Vivian's gaze. Held it. Watched her eyes narrow slightly, surprised that I didn't shrink away. Then I turned and walked toward those heavy glass doors, my chin high, even as my heart shattered into pieces. The humid Houston evening air hit me like a physical blow the moment I stepped outside. The valet looked at me with confusion as I walked past the line of luxury cars, past the valets in their burgundy uniforms, down to the street level where the distant sound of traffic hummed through the darkness. I walked for what felt like miles. My mind replayed Wesley's words on an endless loop. $3 million. Incompetence. Not up to the task. disgracing the family. Each phrase was a small blade, cutting deeper with every repetition. The money was a lie. I knew it was a lie. But it was a lie that would destroy everything. I had been walking for nearly an hour when the car appeared. It came slowly, almost hesitantly, from behind me. The headlights were dimmed, not bright but gentle. I could hear the soft electric hum of a luxury sedan. My heart hammered in my chest. Fear, primal and immediate, flooded through me. I was alone on a semi-dark street in an unfamiliar neighborhood, wearing an expensive dress that screamed money, my phone battery dead for the past 3 hours. I started to walk faster. The car pulled up alongside me. The passenger window descended with the soft whisper of modern mechanics. I kept my eyes forward, every muscle tensed, ready to run. Anya. The voice was warm, familiar. Everything in me froze. I turned and saw Dr. Alana Sharp looking at me through the window of a cream-colored Tesla, her silver-streaked hair catching the streetlight, her dark eyes filled with something that looked like genuine concern. Dr. Alana Sharp. One of the most respected historical preservation experts in the entire country. A woman I hadn't seen in 5 years, but whose kindness I had never forgotten. Dr. Sharp. My voice came out in a whisper. "Get in the car, Anya," she said firmly. "I saw what they did to you. It was disgusting. And we need to talk about something your father would want you to know." I hesitated for only a moment. Then I got in. The interior of the Tesla was warm and smelled like expensive leather and vanilla. Dr. Sharp didn't immediately drive. She turned to look at me fully, and I realized she was seeing all of me. The shattered diploma, the designer dress now wrinkled and torn, the makeup running down my face, the raw devastation I was too proud to hide. "Thank you for stopping," I managed. "But how are you even here? How did you?" "I was dining in a private room across the hall," Dr. Sharp explained, guiding the car smoothly into traffic. "I came to that event to meet with your father's old colleagues about a preservation project. When I heard the commotion, I looked out into the main ballroom. I saw Wesley's face. I saw yours." She paused, her hands steady on the wheel. "And I remembered something I'd owed you for a very long time. 5 years ago, I had helped Dr. Sharp with one of her most complex cases. It was a pro bono project, a small, failing town in rural Pennsylvania fighting against urban developers who wanted to tear down a centuries-old mill. I had uncovered hidden architectural blueprints, discovered documentation that proved the structure was far more historically significant than anyone had realized. It had saved the town. It had saved the mill. Dr. Sharp had said then, "Anya, you have a gift. You see what others miss. You see the truth beneath the surface. If you ever need me, truly need me, I will be there." I had thought it was just kindness, a figure of speech. I had been wrong. "I don't understand," I said as we drove through the glittering Houston night. "Why would you come looking for me? Why would you stop?" "Because," Dr. Sharp said, turning onto a quieter residential street lined with old oak trees, "your father was one of the most intelligent men I ever knew. And I have a strong suspicion that Wesley just made a catastrophic mistake." She pulled into the driveway of a beautiful craftsman-style house nestled among the oaks. Through the windows, I could see warm light and beyond that, the silhouettes of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "A sanctuary." "Tell me everything," Dr. Sharp said, cutting the engine. "Everything about the Legacy Homes project. Everything about what your father left you. And everything about what Wesley just tried to bury." We sat in Dr. Sharp's study, a room that felt like stepping into the collected wisdom of centuries. Books lined every wall, leather-bound and dog-eared and loved. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, casting dancing shadows across worn Persian rugs. 2 cups of chamomile tea sat on the side table between our chairs, untouched and cooling. For the first time in hours, I let myself cry. The story came out in pieces, fragmented and painful. Dr. Sharp listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each revelation. My father, Arthur Vance, had died suddenly a year ago. A massive heart attack at 58. One moment he was reviewing blueprints in his study, the next he was gone. But before he died, he had done something extraordinary. He had left me the Legacy Homes project. Not the company. Not the stocks or the cash reserves or the commercial real estate holdings. Those all went to Wesley, who was his biological son and the presumed heir. My father had left Wesley the business empire he had spent 30 years building. But he had left me something far more valuable. He had left me the land. You see, I explained to Dr. Sharp, the Legacy Homes project wasn't just property. It was a collection of undeveloped parcels that my father had been quietly acquiring for the last 15 years of his life. Some of them he bought with his own money, outside the company. Some were inherited. Some were bequeathed to him by estate holders who understood what he was trying to do. Which was? Dr. Sharp leaned forward slightly. To preserve them, I said. To protect them. Because each one of those properties held the ruins of something historically significant. A colonial mill. A pre-Revolutionary War outpost. An estate that had hosted Lincoln before the war. My father wasn't a businessman in the traditional sense. He was a historian who happened to own a construction company. Wesley, unfortunately, was simply a businessman. After my father died, Wesley had maneuvered himself into control of the entire estate through a complex series of trust manipulations. He had convinced the aging family lawyer that Wesley was better positioned to manage the assets. He had convinced Vivian, through promises of wealth and security, to support his claim to control the company and its associated properties. And then he had discovered that the Legacy Homes project, all of it, was legally and irrevocably mine. Wesley's solution was simple. Offer me money I didn't have and couldn't refuse, pressure me into signing away my intellectual property rights to the land, and then liquidate the properties as cheap commercial real estate to development corporations who would strip them bare and build strip malls. He could make 50, 60 million if he played it right, I whispered. Maybe more. The land is prime commercial real estate in several growing counties. He doesn't care that the land is priceless for other reasons. To Wesley, it's just empty space between point A and point B. And the mysterious $3 million he mentioned at the dinner? Dr. Sharp asked gently. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A fabrication. A lie designed to destroy my credibility and my reputation before I could even understand what was happening. There is no missing money from any Legacy Homes project deal. My father's company has been stable. But Wesley needed me to look incompetent, unreliable, and unfit to manage any kind of inheritance. So he made it public, Dr. Sharp finished. He humiliated you in front of 300 people. He made it so that anyone who might listen to your side of the story would already have a narrative in place. I nodded, unable to speak. He's very good at this, Dr. Sharp observed. There was a note in her voice I hadn't heard before. It was cold. Purposeful. But he made one critical mistake. What's that? I asked. He underestimated what you inherited from your father, she said. Not just the land, Anya. The mind. The vision. The ability to see historical significance where others see only dirt and old stone. She stood and walked to one of her bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines until she found what she was looking for. She pulled out a slim volume, its cover worn soft with handling. I've spent 30 years in historical preservation, she said, settling back into her chair. And I have learned that the law, true law, not clever manipulation, is the most powerful weapon we possess. Preservation law is beautiful, Anya. It's specific. It's rigorous. It's almost impossible to circumvent once it's properly invoked. I don't understand, I said. If we can prove that the land and structures on the Legacy Homes project parcels are historically invaluable, truly invaluable, with documentation and expert corroboration, we can pursue state historical landmark designation for them. And once that happens, the land is frozen. The sale is frozen. Wesley cannot sell stolen treasure for pennies if the law says that treasure is priceless and protected. She paused, letting me absorb this. The question is, Dr. Sharp continued, do you have the documentation? Did your father leave you the proof? I felt something shift in my chest. A spark of something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't quite despair anymore either. There's a database, I said slowly, the memory surfacing like a swimmer breaking through water. My father created it. He called it the Structural Memory Database. The SMD. It contains architectural blueprints, historical documentation, topographical maps, geological surveys, everything. It's not just data. It's intuitive. It responds to architectural expertise and historical knowledge. My father used to say it was like the land itself was speaking, telling its story to anyone with the ears to listen. And where, Dr. Sharp asked quietly, is this database? Hidden, I said. In his private study. The Blue Room. Behind a physical reader, a specialized interface that my father designed himself. It requires someone with genuine architectural and historical intuition to activate it. You can't just plug in a password or use a security code. The SMD responds to expertise. Dr. Sharp smiled then, a smile that suggested she was already 3 moves ahead on a chessboard I hadn't even realized we were playing. Then we have work to do, she said. But first, we need the reader. And for that, I think we need to talk about a groundskeeper named Mr. Finch. Mr. Finch's retirement home was small and immaculate, nestled on a quiet street lined with magnolia trees. There were flower boxes beneath every window, all carefully tended, each planted with what looked like recently turned soil. The man who answered the door was smaller than I remembered him, and older. His hair had gone completely white, his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the frame, but his eyes were still sharp, still kind, still radiating the quiet strength that had made him my favorite person on the entire Vance property. "Little Anya," he said, and his voice cracked with emotion. "I heard what they did. Old Mrs. Chan from down the street saw it on one of those internet videos before they took it down. I'm sorry, child. I'm so sorry." I felt fresh tears threaten, but I pushed them back. We didn't have time for grief right now. We had work to do. I stepped inside, and the air wrapped around me like a warm blanket. It smelled of pipe tobacco and clean laundry and something else, something like the earth after rain. The living room was modest but filled with photographs. I could see pictures of my father in among them. Pictures of the gardens at Vance Manor in different seasons. Pictures of Mr. Finch's late wife, smiling from a porch swing. "Mr. Finch," I said, sitting across from him in a worn leather recliner that had clearly been his favorite spot for many years, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to ask you is risky and unconventional. But I also need you to know that my father trusted you with something once, and I think it's time that trust bore fruit." The old man's expression shifted. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or the settling of a long-held question. "Your father gave you a key," I said. "A long time ago. A silver key. He told you to give it to me if Wesley ever tried to sell the property. Do you still have it?" Mr. Finch didn't speak. He simply rose, slowly, carefully, and walked to a small wooden box on the shelf beside his television. His hands shook as he opened it. Beneath a collection of old documents and photographs, I saw it. A silver key. Tarnished with age, but bright where it had been handled regularly, as if someone had held it, polished it, remembered it every single day for the past year. "Arthur gave me this key in 1997, Mr. Finch said, his voice thick with emotion. He said, "Mr. Finch, if anything ever happens to me, and if Wesley ever decides to sell the house or the land, you give this key to Anya. Tell her that some things are worth more than money. Tell her that her father's heart is in that soil, in that old stone. Tell her to protect it. I've kept that key for 26 years, Anya. And I've prayed every single day that I'd never have to give it to you. But Wesley..." He shook his head. "Wesley fired me. After 30 years of service, after I refused to cut down the oak trees your father planted, he dismissed me. Like I was nothing. Like I didn't matter." "That key matters," I told him gently. "And so do you. More than you know." He pressed the key into my hand, and it was warm from his pocket, heavy with purpose and history. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to save my father's legacy," I said. "I'm going to do what he taught me to do. I'm going to look beneath the surface and see the truth. And then I'm going to make Wesley answer for what he's done." The Vance Manor blazed with light when I arrived. Wesley was hosting one of his elaborate parties. A victory celebration, I realized. The closing on the land sale was scheduled for the following week. This was his moment of triumph, or so he believed. 300 guests circulated through the halls, champagne flutes in hand, indulging in expensive catering and expensive wine. It was the perfect distraction. I parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through the neighborhood with careful purpose. The September night was warm and thick with humidity, the kind of Houston heat that clung to your skin like a living thing. I wore dark clothes, dark jeans, a dark sweater, and my hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. The silver key was in my pocket, and it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The tall boxwood hedges that surrounded the property had been there since I was a child. I had hidden in them during games of hide and seek. I had sat beneath them when my stepmother's cruelty became too much to bear. Now, I used them as cover, slipping past the front entrance and making my way around to the back of the property. My heart hammered against my ribs with such force that I thought surely the guests inside would hear it. The back porch door was old and used only by groundskeepers and deliverymen. I had watched Mr. Finch use this entrance 1,000 times. My hands shook as I pressed the silver key into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. I slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The wood groaned slightly, old hinges, old house, old secrets, but no one heard. The music from the main ballroom hummed through the floorboards. Laughter echoed through the halls. I moved quickly through the servants' corridors, the passages that had once been used by household staff to move invisibly through the mansion. These hallways were narrow and dimly lit, lined with utility closets and storage spaces. No one ever came here anymore. Vivian had fired most of the household staff years ago, preferring to manage the mansion herself with occasional cleaning services. The sounds of the party grew louder as I ascended the grand staircase that led to the second floor. My father's study, the Blue Room, was located at the end of a narrow corridor on the east side of the mansion. It was a room few people had ever entered, a space my father had kept almost sacred. When he died, Wesley had locked it immediately. No one had been inside since. The hallway was empty. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the cream-colored carpet. My breathing sounded impossibly loud in the silence. I reached the door to the Blue Room and pressed the silver key into its lock. For a moment, I thought it might not work. I thought perhaps the lock had been changed, or the mechanism had seized after a year of disuse. Then, with a soft click, the door swung inward. The room was exactly as my father had left it. The air inside seemed to hold its breath, a sanctuary untouched by the chaos of the world beyond. The scent of cedar and old paper, leather and the faint ghost of my father's cologne, wrapped around me like an embrace. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on architecture, history, restoration, and design. A massive antique desk dominated the center of the room, its surface organized with the precise care of a man who understood that chaos was the enemy of creativity. I moved to the desk and ran my fingers along its worn surface. I could see where my father's hands had rested 1,000,000 times, where the wood had been polished by use and care. Behind the desk was a wall panel painted the same blue as the rest of the room. To the casual observer, it would seem like part of the architecture. But I knew better. My father had built a false bottom into his desk. I had discovered it when I was 12 years old, and he had shown me then what lay beneath. I pressed upward against the underside of the desk, and the hidden panel released with a soft click. There it was. The structural memory database reader lay inside a leather-bound case, sleek and elegant, designed to look like an oversized book or a highly specialized tablet. The interface was dark, dormant, waiting for someone with the right knowledge to wake it. My hands shook as I carefully lifted it from its hiding place and tucked it into my jacket. The leather was soft, aged, and as warm as if my father had just set it down. I locked the Blue Room behind me and retraced my steps through the servants' corridors, down the back staircase, through the side passage, and out the back porch door. The key clicked locked behind me. The warm Houston night received me like a conspirator. I moved quickly back through the boxwood hedges, my heart finally beginning to slow as I reached the street where my borrowed car waited. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. If I looked back, I might lose my nerve. But as I drove away from Vance Manor, I felt something shift inside me. The shame of the graduation dinner began to crystallize into something else. Something harder. Something stronger. It wasn't rage anymore. It was purpose. Dr. Sharp's study felt different that night. The fireplace cast everything in shades of gold and shadow. She had cleared the coffee table and set up her personal laptop, connecting it to various cables and adapters. The SMD reader lay in the center of the cleared space like an artifact in a museum. "Your father was a genius," Dr. Sharp said, studying the device with the focused intensity of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. "This is not just a database. This is an interactive architecture. It's designed to respond to human intuition. To respond to you." "How is that possible?" I asked, sitting beside her, my heart still racing from the infiltration. "Your father understood something that most architects forget," Dr. Sharp explained. "Architecture isn't just about mathematics and physics. It's about feeling. It's about understanding the soul of a place. The material memory. The emotional weight. A truly great architect, and your father was one, understands that buildings speak a language that goes deeper than blueprint and code." She gestured for me to come closer, to touch the device. "He designed this so that it would require genuine expertise to activate it. Not just password security or biometric scanners. But real expertise. Real knowledge. Real love for the work." I reached out with trembling fingers and touched the surface of the SMD reader. The interface illuminated instantly, responding to my touch like it had been waiting for me. Colors bloomed across the screen. Deep blues and warm oranges and rich greens. Maps emerged, topographical renderings, architectural blueprints more detailed and sophisticated than anything I had ever seen. But beyond the technical data, there was something else. Something that moved through the information like water through stone. It was like my father's voice. Like his hand guiding mine. Like he was there in the room with us, showing me what he had hidden away, trusting me with the truth he knew Wesley would destroy. "What am I looking at?" I whispered. "The future," Dr. Sharp said softly. "The true value of the Legacy Homes project. Look." As I navigated the database, and it was intuitive, responding to my architectural training, opening up layers of information as I touched and swiped, a story emerged. A story written in stone and soil and historical significance. The Legacy Homes project consisted of 7 separate parcels of land. Each parcel contained the ruins or remnants of a historically significant structure. The oldest was Stonehaven Mill, a colonial-era textile mill that dated back to 1743. It was one of the last remaining structures of its kind in the entire state, predating industrialization by nearly 100 years. There was a Revolutionary War outpost, marked by partial stone foundations that dated to 1776. An antebellum plantation house, burned during the Civil War but with enough architectural remnants to identify its original design and historical importance. A pre-Columbian trading post. Burial grounds protected under federal law. Each property held layers of American history, waiting to be preserved and honored. "What's the valuation?" Dr. Sharp asked, leaning closer to the screen. I navigated deeper into the database, scrolling through my father's meticulous notes and calculations. The numbers appeared, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. $50 million, I whispered. For preservation value alone. Some of these properties could be designated as National Historical Landmarks. Stonehaven Mill alone is valued at $25 million for preservation purposes. And if Wesley sells it? Dr. Sharp asked, though she already knew the answer. He could sell the land for perhaps $2 million as commercial real estate. Maybe 3, depending on the buyer. He's about to sell priceless historical artifacts for pennies on the dollar. He's about to destroy centuries of American heritage because he doesn't see anything but empty space and profit margins. Dr. Sharp stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark Houston night. "Then we have work to do," she said. "And we need to do it perfectly." We didn't sleep that night. Instead, Dr. Sharp and I worked with the focus of 2 people who understood that we were engaged in something far larger than personal revenge. This wasn't about destroying Wesley. This was about protecting my father's legacy. This was about honoring the truth that he had hidden away, trusting that someday, someone would have the courage and wisdom to use it. Dr. Sharp explained the framework of preservation law with the patience of a master teacher. Preservation law, she told me, was like a fortress. Once you proved that a property had genuine historical significance, if you could document it, provide expert testimony, and demonstrate that its preservation value exceeded its commercial value, the law moved to protect it. The key, she explained, spreading out documents across her desk, is state historical landmark designation. Once a property receives this designation, it's protected. The sale is frozen. The land cannot be developed. The structures cannot be destroyed. But Wesley has already promised the land to a buyer, I said. The sale closes next week. Then we move immediately, Dr. Sharp replied. We file for landmark designation status as quickly as possible. The filing itself creates an automatic temporary freeze on any transaction. Once the freeze is in place, Wesley cannot complete the sale no matter what he does. How long does the process take? I asked. Normally, several months. But I have connections at the State Preservation Authority. And I have expertise that will give us credibility. If we file tomorrow, present overwhelming documentation, and make the case compelling enough, we might accelerate the hearing to within 2 weeks. Will that be fast enough? I asked. It will have to be, Dr. Sharp said simply. We spent the entire night photographing every page of data from the SMD database, creating backup files, organizing information, and documenting the historical significance of each parcel. My father had done most of the heavy lifting. He had collected primary sources, original deeds, historical documents, archaeological reports. He had preserved everything, organized everything, made it so that someone with the knowledge to understand it would have all the proof they needed. By dawn, we had assembled a file thick with evidence. Dr. Sharp printed it all out and organized it into categories: Stonehaven Mill, Revolutionary War Outpost, Antebellum Plantation, and so on. Each section contained architectural drawings, historical documentation, expert analysis, and topographical maps proving the historical significance of each location. This is beautiful, Dr. Sharp said, running her hand over the completed file. This is your father's life work, Anya. This is his voice, speaking from beyond the grave. And it's perfect. The call came at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was from Vivian, her voice high-pitched and layered with false sweetness, the tone she used when she was afraid, when she was trying to manipulate someone who might have actual power over her future. Darling, how are you? She cooed, as if she hadn't publicly humiliated me less than a week before. I've been so worried about you. It must have been such a misunderstanding at the dinner. Wesley feels terrible. We all do. They were lies, all of it. But I let her continue. The closing is next week, she said. And I wanted to extend an offer of genuine family support. If you sign away your IP rights to the Legacy Homes project now, just a simple document, Wesley has agreed to gift you $20,000. $20,000, Anya. That's more than you've ever earned. It's enough to start over somewhere. Fresh start. New life. Wouldn't that be wonderful? It was a bribe. A desperate, inadequate bribe delivered with the assumption that I was desperate enough to take it. That I was powerless enough, broken enough, to accept pennies for my inheritance. Thank you for the offer, Mother, I said calmly. But I'm not going to accept. I've already filed a document with the State Preservation Authority that will protect my father's legacy. You might want to discuss this with Wesley's lawyers. I suspect they'll want to talk to you very soon. I hung up before she could respond. I didn't know if the filing had actually been submitted yet. But Dr. Sharp had promised it would be done by end of day. And I needed Vivian to know that something was coming. I needed them to taste fear. 36 hours later, Dr. Sharp used her connections at the State Preservation Authority to formally file the landmark nomination for Stonehaven Mill and all connected Legacy Homes project parcels. The filing included 400 pages of meticulously organized documentation, expert testimony from Dr. Sharp herself, architectural analysis, historical research, and the core evidence from the structural memory database. The legal effect was immediate and decisive. The moment the filing was received and processed, An automatic temporary freeze went into effect on the entire Legacy Homes project property. The sale could not proceed. The contracts couldn't be finalized. Wesley was legally bound, prevented by law from completing the transaction. I imagine him when he found out. I imagine the moment his lawyer called with the news, the shock registering on his face as he realized something had gone catastrophically wrong. I imagine Vivian's calculated composure finally cracking. But the true masterpiece came 3 days later. Dr. Sharp's lawyers, brilliant people who understood preservation law in the way that poets understand language, discovered something that Wesley's own lawyers had apparently missed in their arrogance. The Vance mansion itself was technically tied into the Legacy Homes project trust structure because its sprawling, undeveloped backyard included the perimeter of the Stonehaven Mill preservation boundary. Because of the way my father had structured the original property acquisition, the mansion and the land parcels were legally intertwined. Which meant that the landmark filing didn't just freeze the undeveloped land. It threw the title to the mansion into legal chaos. Wesley didn't just lose the land sale. He suddenly couldn't prove clean title to the house he was living in. The bank, which held the mortgage on the mansion, immediately became nervous. The commercial buyer, furious about the frozen deal and the demolished contract, filed a breach of contract lawsuit asking for treble damages. Wesley was suddenly trapped between 3 collapsing walls: the frozen land deal, the threatened mansion title, and a lawsuit that threatened to bankrupt him entirely. "This is beautiful in its symmetry," Dr. Sharp said as her lawyers explained the cascading legal consequences. "He wanted to destroy you by humiliating you publicly. But he didn't understand that some weapons are far more sophisticated than public shame. Law is like architecture, Anya. You build it carefully, and it stands forever." Vivian called again 4 days later. This time, her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. It was stripped down to raw desperation. "Anya, please." Her voice cracked. "Please stop this. The lawyers are saying we're bankrupt. Liam is facing criminal charges for fraud. The federal prosecutors got involved. We could lose everything. Everything." I repeated. "Like the way you tried to take everything from me?" "You can still fix this," she pleaded. "You have all the power now. If you withdraw the nomination, everything stops. No lawsuit, no bankruptcy, no criminal charges. Just stop, please." "Why should I?" I asked quietly. "Because we're your family," she whispered. "Because some things matter more than revenge." "Is that what you thought when you humiliated me in front of 300 people?" I asked. "Is that what you thought when you tried to gaslight me into believing I was incompetent? That I was nothing?" The line went silent. "I'm not doing this for revenge, Mother," I said, and I meant it. "I'm doing this to protect something my father loved more than anything. I'm doing this because the truth matters. And I'm doing this because Wesley made a choice. He could have left the land alone. He could have honored what my father built. Instead, he chose greed." I hung up. The morning of the State Preservation Board hearing, I dressed carefully. I wore a charcoal suit that had belonged to my father. I had taken it from the mansion weeks ago, before my infiltration. It hung slightly loose on my shoulders, but it felt right to wear his fabric, to carry his presence with me into this final confrontation. The hearing room was formal and austere, all dark wood and the particular hush that falls over spaces where important decisions are made. There were 17 board members, historians, architects, preservation experts, lawyers. Dr. Sharp sat with me at the front table, her presence steady and formidable. Wesley sat across the room, flanked by his lawyers. He looked diminished somehow, as if the weight of his own choices had physically broken him. Vivian sat behind him in the gallery, her hands clenched in her lap. The lead board member, a distinguished woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, called the hearing to order. "We are here," she began, "to evaluate the landmark nomination filed by Dr. Alana Sharp and Anya Vance for the Stonehaven Mill site and the connected Legacy Homes project parcels. This hearing will determine whether these properties meet the criteria for state historical landmark designation. Dr. Sharp will present the case for designation. Mr. Wesley Vance will have the opportunity to present opposing arguments. Then the board will deliberate." Dr. Sharp stood and began her presentation with the focused precision of a scholar who had spent a lifetime building cases for preservation. She walked the board through each property. She showed photographs, some new, some historical. She presented archaeological reports. She introduced expert witnesses, colleagues from preservation institutes across the country who testified to the extraordinary historical significance of Stonehaven Mill specifically. This is one of the last intact examples of pre-industrial textile manufacturing architecture in the entire state, one expert testified. Its preservation value cannot be overstated. This is the kind of structure that museums build around. This is the kind of site that defines regional American history. The evidence was overwhelming. The SMD database had given us everything we needed: comprehensive, detailed, irrefutable proof of historical significance. Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands shaking slightly, and I walked to the presentation podium. "My name is Anya Vance," I began, "and my father was Arthur Vance. He was an architect and a businessman, but more importantly, he was a historian. He understood that buildings aren't just structures. They're memory made physical. They're time preserved in stone and wood and earth." I paused, looking directly at the board members. My father spent the last 15 years of his life acquiring the Legacy Homes project parcels. He didn't do it for profit. He did it to protect something that mattered. Something irreplaceable. He created the structural memory database to ensure that if something ever threatened these properties, the truth about their historical significance would be preserved. He trusted that someday, someone would have the courage to fight for what he believed in. I pulled up the first image on the screen, a rendering from the SMD database showing Stonehaven Mill not as it exists today in ruin, but as it had been in 1743. A complete, functioning structure. A piece of living history. This mill employed hundreds of people. It powered the economy of an entire region. It housed innovations in manufacturing that changed American industry. My father didn't see empty land that could be converted to commercial development. He saw a legacy that deserved protection. I looked at Wesley for the first time. There are people in this room who would destroy this legacy for profit. Who see only dollar signs where my father saw history. Who measure value in commercial terms instead of understanding that some things transcend economic measurement. I turned back to the board. I'm asking you to see what my father saw. To understand that protecting this land isn't about preventing development. It's about honoring the truth. It's about recognizing that some things matter more than money. Some things are worth preserving even if it costs someone their profit margin. When I finished speaking, the room was completely silent. The board deliberated for less than 5 minutes. When they returned to the hearing room, Margaret Chen's expression was grave but certain. "We have reviewed all evidence presented," she announced. "We have evaluated the landmark nomination against the criteria established by the State Preservation Authority. By unanimous vote of all 17 board members, we find that the Stonehaven Mill site and all connected Legacy Homes project parcels meet the requirements for state historical landmark designation." She paused, and the weight of that moment pressed down on everything. "The following properties are hereby designated as state historical landmarks, effective immediately: Stonehaven Mill, Revolutionary War outpost, antebellum plantation ruins, and all associated archaeological and historical sites within the Legacy Homes project boundary." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. "All commercial development on these properties is prohibited in perpetuity. The properties must be preserved in their current state. Any future development must be exclusively for historical, educational, or preservation purposes." Wesley made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. His lawyers immediately began whispering to each other, their faces pale. Vivian stared straight ahead, her entire body rigid with shock. I felt Dr. Sharp take my hand and squeeze it. We had won. But more importantly, my father had won. His vision, his legacy, his life's work had been vindicated. What happened next was almost anticlimactic in its efficiency. Wesley's borrowed time collapsed like a house of cards built on lies. The commercial buyer's lawsuit proceeded without mercy. The bank foreclosed on the mansion. Federal prosecutors moved forward with fraud charges against Wesley for his manipulation of the trust documents and his dishonest dealings with the commercial buyer. I learned, through old lawyers and older networks, that Wesley had obtained the money for his lifestyle through fraudulent trust documents, falsified property valuations, and deliberate misrepresentation of the Legacy Homes project's status to potential buyers. The House of Cards wasn't just built on greed. It was built on criminal negligence. Vivian made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. She cornered me at a distant family gathering 3 weeks after the hearing. Her appearance had deteriorated. Her hair was dull, her designer clothes suddenly looked tired, her carefully maintained composure had finally shattered. "Anya, please," she said, pulling me into a quiet corner with surprising strength. "We have nothing left. Nothing. If you withdraw the nomination now, the estate could potentially be salvaged. You could save your brother. You could save the family name." I looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time. I saw the fear. I saw the desperation. I saw a woman who had built her entire life on the belief that appearance and status could protect you from consequences. And now reality was closing in. "The garden cottage," I said quietly. "The one my father bequeathed to me in his original will. The one you've been claiming ownership of for the past year. It's mine. It was always mine. You can sign the deed over to me, and I'll ensure you're not homeless." She stared at me in shock. "But the nomination stays in place," I said. "The nomination was never about you, Mother. It was about protecting what my father believed in. That doesn't change because you're suffering. Your suffering is a consequence of Wesley's choices, not of mine." I walked away, leaving her standing in that corner, still trying to calculate angles that no longer existed. The garden cottage was a jewel hidden at the edge of the family property, a Victorian-era guesthouse that my father had restored personally. It had 3 bedrooms, a library, a kitchen with original glass-fronted cabinets, and a garden that seemed to grow more beautiful with each passing season. I hired Mr. Finch as my head gardener. He came out of retirement with a vigor that belied his age. Together, we transformed the cottage's carriage house into my architecture studio. I designed it myself: open spaces, enormous windows, soft north-facing light perfect for design work. I painted the walls a soft sage green and filled the shelves with books on architectural history, preservation, and design. My first project was the Stonehaven Mill restoration. Working with Dr. Sharp's Preservation Institute, I designed a modest museum and visitor center that honored the historical significance of the site without overwhelming its ancient beauty. I sourced period-appropriate materials. I studied the original architectural drawings my father had preserved. I walked the ruins 100 times, listening to what my father had always said buildings could teach us if we were patient enough to listen. The work was slow and meditative and profoundly healing. 2 months after the hearing, Dr. Sharp called me with news that made me laugh. A real laugh, the first one in months that came from genuine joy rather than bitter satisfaction. "The Vance mansion is being auctioned," she said. "The bank is selling it to satisfy Wesley's debt. It's going for a fraction of its worth, probably around $4 million. Some preservation-minded buyer will likely acquire it." "Is that so?" I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yes," Dr. Sharp said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "In fact, I've already submitted a bid. My Preservation Institute is planning to acquire it. We're going to convert it into headquarters for the Institute for Historical Preservation and Educational Outreach. We'll use it to teach the next generation of preservationists. We'll hold seminars there, archive research, mentor young historians." I felt something inside me shift. Not quite completion, because the work would never truly be complete, but something close. A sense that the circle was closing. That what had been broken and betrayed was being transformed into something new and purposeful. "The Vance Manor," Dr. Sharp continued, "where you were humiliated, where Wesley plotted his greed, is going to become a sanctuary for the very things that made your father's life meaningful. A place where history is honored. Where beauty is preserved. Where the past and future meet." I stand in the restored Stonehaven Mill on a warm spring morning, watching sunlight stream through newly reinforced historic windows. The mill has been carefully restored. Every board, every stone, every mechanical element treated with reverence and expertise. Tours come through twice a day now, filled with schoolchildren and history enthusiasts and preservation advocates. The inscription above the entrance reads, "Dedicated to Arthur Vance, 1961 to 2023, architect, historian, visionary. He saw the future in the past and preserved it for generations yet to come." My architecture firm has grown quietly but steadily. I specialize in historical restoration and preservation consultation. My work has been recognized by the American Institute of Architects. I've been featured in preservation journals and architectural magazines. But none of that matters as much as this, the work itself. The opportunity to honor the past while creating a future. The Garden Cottage has become a destination for architecture students and preservation professionals. I've hosted seminars there, mentored young architects, collaborated with Dr. Sharp on groundbreaking preservation projects. Mr. Finch still tends the gardens with the love and attention that only comes from genuine care. Wesley and Vivian disappeared from my life entirely after the legal consequences fully materialized. Wesley served 2 years in federal prison for fraud. Vivian moved to Switzerland, or so I heard through distant relatives. I don't think of them often. What happened to them feels like a natural consequence of choices they made, not a victory I orchestrated. What I think about instead is my father. I think about him walking these ruins in the year before he died, knowing that his son wanted to destroy what he had worked to build. I think about him creating the structural memory database as his final gift to me. Not money, not status, but knowledge. The knowledge that truth matters. That beauty matters. That some things are worth fighting for. I think about the silver key, now mounted in a frame in my studio, a reminder of the moment when everything changed. The moment when Mr. Finch's loyalty and my courage and Dr. Sharp's wisdom converged to protect what deserved protection. The public humiliation at my graduation feels like it happened to someone else now. It did destroy me. The woman who walked out of that ballroom is gone. But from her ashes rose someone stronger, someone more purposeful, someone who understood that the real power doesn't come from money or status or the ability to make others feel small. Real power comes from knowing the truth. Real power comes from using knowledge to serve something larger than yourself. Real power comes from having the courage to fight for what matters. The morning light catches the mill's stone walls, and for a moment, I can almost see my father there, walking beside me, nodding his approval. Seeing me finally understand what he had always known. That some legacies are worth more than empires. That some victories are measured not in what you destroy, but in what you protect. That the strongest revenge isn't destruction at all. It's creation. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by my stepbrother's cruel seating chart or the fact he drained my funds. My story proves that silence was my weapon, allowing me to retrieve the SMD reader and use the law, not anger, to fight back. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your boundaries don't make you difficult. I didn't beg for the mansion, I simply froze its title by certifying the land as a historical landmark. Their greed destroyed them. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. My worth was never in question, it was only ever waiting to be remembered. Have you ever had to prove your worth to a family that underestimated you? Share your story below.